Okay, welcome very much. It's good to see you. Glad you could get in on this, Joe. It's really good. Welcome to New York City. And in the audience, a pleasure to welcome to the program two people that have been long. I know Sara Flounders, who is the co-founder of the International Action Center, close associate of a man of great distinction, Ramsey Clark, over a long career fighting for justice in a broad general sense, political justice and knowledge. And so, Sara, welcome very much. We've done programs in the past. Welcome at this 31st of March on the year 2011, when a whole lot of things are going on. And on the far left is Joe Lombardo, and he's an organizer of a major event that many people are involved with, called the United National Anti-War Committee. And they've got an event scheduled for April 9 that we want to make sure we let people here in New York City, that we be sure we want to let people know is billed as a major confrontation with the war-making and demands for peace that is national. And I think it's going to be here in New York on the 9th, San Francisco on the 10th, and across the country. We're going to get into details about that. And there's a list of co-sponsors of the anti-war rally on the 9th, and it just covers so many people. We can't go into it; it goes so long. But good luck in all of that in terms of what you're organizing coming up. I want to let people know about that.
Thank you,
Sara. What do you think? We're in a time all this is going on. You've addressed our group, the ACAP Association, the other day. This is a time of qualitative breakthrough, change, the things that have been going on in Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, now Syria, and so forth. What do you think? Are we at a time of some sort of a culmination or a qualitative transformation? And is it only in the Arab world? Is it the world? How do you feel about major transformations coming just at such a rapid speed and with such import in such a short period of time on this March 31st of the year 2011?
Well, certainly the changes are enormous,
yes,
and happening at warp speed. I mean, really, really fast. When you think about it, the movement in Egypt 2 months ago, and actually I was in Egypt just before that, 2 weeks before that, and at that time we asked almost everyone we spoke to, did they see any possibility for change? And everyone we spoke to said, not in their lifetime. They couldn't conceive of it. And yet, January 25th, when it actually began as a small struggle in Tahrir Square and spread within days. Within days and 2 weeks, the entire country shut down, every single city. Huge strikes, protests, demonstrations. The police overrun the security service, irrelevant, and the military, realizing what they were up against, finally ended their support for a dictator who had been in power 32 years. So it really shows the ability. There are moments in time when people in the millions lose their fear.
A general strike notion.
It was a general strike and more, because it was the whole society, and it was both workers going out on strike, it was students, it was youth, it was the millions of unemployed. Egypt has been kept totally impoverished. The country with the highest cultural and political center of the Arab world had been kept in chains with a US-backed dictator, Mubarak. And finally, he was forced to leave. It had immediate repercussions when you think of Madison, Wisconsin. And the youth there who went in and took over the Capitol, and their signs, walk like an Egyptian. They were looking at what was happening. Last night, by the way, we should really salute the hundreds in the Capitol in Albany, New York, who refused to leave because there was legislation that is going to cut everything in terms of education and social services here in New York. So there were hundreds of people, and their reason for staying is they're inspired by what they're seeing, whether it's in Tahrir Square in Cairo or whether it's in Madison, Wisconsin. So those ideas can begin to catch hold that what's needed is real confrontation, is demands, refusing to back down. That's in the air at this point. And it's a big threat to corporate power. It's a big threat to the military machine. It has a lot to do with their newest war in Libya, how to demoralize and push back millions of people, how to undercut their consciousness of what they're capable of doing, and again create an atmosphere of fear through dropping bunker busters, through Tomahawk cruise missiles, covering the sky, no fly, and then it's no drive, and it's no breathe. Really, that's...
Knowledge of Trident submarines that are over the horizon, ready to unleash utter devastation.
Right, right. That's really true. So it's a moment where you have millions of people in change and putting forth real demands for an end to dictatorships and also a say in their future.
I reread a little bit of Naomi Klein's Shock Doctrine.
Yeah. Right.
Very good book, it seems to me. She writes very well. She understands economics very well. Great critique of the Friedman Chicago School and all that sort of thing. But she said it's a condition where you have shock and awe. They had that bombing campaign in Iraq and so on. It creates a chaos that gives an ability for certain people who are thinking it through to be able to take advantage ever more of the mass of the citizens than they have historically been doing. Do you think there's a danger of that?
That is the idea that she explains in some detail. That this really comes out of think tanks, of the Pentagon, that huge events like a tsunami, like an earthquake, or like a U.S. military strike that's so massive that the U.S. can go in and have what they call a clean slate.
Right.
In other words, wipe every rule, every gain that workers in the past have won off the slate and begin at a ground zero.
Yeah.
Now, as much as they thought they could do that, it turned out in Iraq, remember they thought shock and awe, and they went in, they said all contracts, all subsidies, all funds, this is passed. And what happened was people fought. They resisted, even though it was clear Iraq had not only no weapons of mass destruction, they didn't have an aircraft battery left. They had nothing. And yet, here it is 8 years later, and the resistance, 100,000, there's 50,000 U.S. troops left there and 100,000 contractors.
Yeah, yes, more contractors
private
than
mercenary armies. Yeah. And in Afghanistan, where there was no army at all, and there was no air force whatsoever, and yet 10 years into it, there are 100,000 U.S. troops. Draining and another 100,000 contractors.
And it seems to be, we did a program with Charles Rangel there yesterday, I think, and he just said that it seems to be there is a blank check for all things military and no accountability at all. It's just simply that's all given. Crystal City and the people are living in palaces now that are of the defense industry. Mr. Eisenhower warned us against military-industrial complex. Seems to be on steroids, and it seems to be having its own way, and using a propaganda thing and taking advantage of the shock doctrine to propagandize about how wonderful we are in terms of our humanitarian concern for the world, while we haven't very much done a very good record of caring for the least among us, where the people don't have some mineral or some resource that we can exploit for profit.
Yesterday's news, this was on the front page of the New York Times, that a program to save small homeowners from mortgage foreclosure for 2 years had been pending. It's a small program, $1 billion. And the scale of trillion-dollar military budgets, $1 billion still pending after 2 years, and now not expected to go through. And when you think about it, a week and a half ago, the U.S. began the bombardment of Libya and has already run up more than $1 billion just on this one campaign. $100 million a day. No vote, no decision, nothing.
No congressional
And yet they couldn't make a decision for $1 billion to save 2 million homeowners.
Well, it is that the least among us are not very well considered in the calculus of the people who are in charge of the major countries of the world. The world is not a democracy. It is a plutocracy economically, certainly. Right. And by and large, in each political entity, politically as well. Right. And we live with that, and we have for a long time. People are asking for an abstract thing like freedom. It's hard to have freedom if you have poverty, if you have no hope in terms of the conditions that are in place. And what they're trying to do in terms of the international order, the whole economic system of the world and so forth, is asked to accept as legitimate a certain view of the way things are going to go. But the concentration of wealth is getting even greater at the top. It's going into almost absurd proportions now here in the homeland of this. And the world, it seems to be that the system that is calling itself legitimate, the UN has been very, very truncated in any of its representation by not having any right connection with it by this, and that it's a point of very, very, it's at a crucial point of coming, like it's coming to the end of some sort of an extension of traditional geopolitical thinking and power and imperialism and so forth, to where there's going to be some sort of a qualitative transformation where that revolutionary spirit is going to come here, where the problem is, the United States of America. Exactly. Does that make any sense?
Not only makes sense, it is survival here. Unless that happens, we've seen actually an effort to destroy unions totally.
Right.
To get rid of public education in the U.S. I mean, this is really true with the charter school movement being fostered from the very top. No Child Left Behind, all of that. A third of our youth don't graduate from high school.
In Detroit?
Yeah. Pipe in, Joe. Yeah,
okay.
Right. Detroit, that's my hometown, brother.
In Detroit, the class size is going to raise to 60 people in a classroom.
Wow.
They're really destroying public education. And what we're finding...
Your mic, if your mic... Here,
you
want to... Go ahead, just connect it up.
Okay.
I just noticed. Yeah, go ahead. In Detroit, classes of 60?
They will have 60 children in a class.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's really the same problem. There's been dictatorships, and we talked about the North Africa and Middle East. There's been dictatorships in these countries for decades that have been supported by the United States. But a lot of what pushed it over the edge was not just that they finally got fed up with dictatorship and wanted democracy. They've wanted that all along. But it was some of the same neoliberal political, neoliberal economic policies that are affecting the workers in Wisconsin or New York State. I myself am a New York State worker and a trade unionist, that made it intolerable for some of the people to the point where they set themselves on fire and started a fire throughout the whole Middle East. And it's these same policies that are causing the upsurge in throughout the world and here. And it's going to get to a point where we either fight back or we die. And I think people are starting to fight back in the United States and throughout the whole world. Sarah mentioned that people have stayed overnight in the state capitol. Well, I was there with them yesterday.
You're in Albany, you mean in New York?
In New York
in
State.
Albany, there was an event. I missed it. Okay, yeah, good.
Well, in case you don't know, that the Albany legislature just passed a draconian state budget.
As have many states gone that same way.
Which cuts all the programs that people need. Our governor is talking about 10 to 40,000 layoffs. In my hometown of Albany, that will devastate the entire economy. State workers are a big part of the economy in Albany. Yet when they passed this budget, they would not talk about taxing the millionaires tax, what they've been calling it. Which is tax on the rich. The highest earners in this state used to pay 16%. They now pay about 7% in state taxes, which is not much different than the lowest earners in this state. If they just brought it up to where it used to be before, we would no longer have a state budget, and we wouldn't have to cut programs in CUNY and SUNY. We wouldn't have to take money out of the education budgets for all the communities. We wouldn't have to lay off the state workers. But they refused to do that. Not only that, they have given so much to the wealthy in this state.
It's absurd. It's obscene.
There is
obscene
something
beyond belief.
There is something called a tax transfer fee. When I, in Albany County, buy a shirt, I have to pay 8% sales tax.
Yeah.
When someone buys $100 million worth of stock, they pay 1/4 of 1%. But a few years ago, we decided to rebate that entire amount. So we rebated to the obscenely rich in this state $16 billion this year, and we have a $10 billion budget deficit. So do we really have a deficit, or is it really that we are making a choice to give to the wealthy and make them more wealthy at the expense of working people and the poor?
It's obviously
or that there's a real state.
It's obvious that right wing, that's the thrust of it, and it seems to have a great effect. In Eisenhower's day, it was up, and Truman, it was up 91%.
That's right.
Tax
That's right.
on the wealthy, and so forth. And now it's gotten down to where the input of big money and the concentration of the money with the people who are already wealthy getting wealthier as they sleep, and exponentially so, it's getting to be where it becomes unworkable. And that there is a general strike is in the air, it seems to me, and lack of vision, a lack of vision of something that can take into account what's going on in terms of the world that does not have a vision that's relative to what the future now allows, newly so, in terms of broader evolutionary developments. There's a tremendous ability to take care of everybody. The knowledge is coming in over the transom in a revolutionary way from every discipline across the spectrum and so forth. We have a capability unprecedented in the evolutionary process, and we don't have a system that lets us relate to that future capability in a positive sense, just as we have trouble dealing with the fact that those Trident submarines, after about 1970 or so, have become species lethal. The weapon systems can no longer be thrown around with wild abandon and so forth, because it means the end of the species if an irrational exchange or occurrence. And that's something that's existentially new, and our leaders don't seem to take it into account ever.
Well,
particularly the idea, we may have actually transcended material scarcity in terms of our capability. We're reifying outdated institutions in the name of some economic theory or so forth that are going on, that it's not adequate to what the future requires, and the future requires a liberated planet of liberated people that we've never had historically. It's always been a few people lording it over the serfs, and it's continuing to be so. Now they're just wanting to take away whatever little bit of security the serfs have had and put it in the hands of the lords, just like it was on a feudal estate. I don't think it's something that can be tolerated, and we don't have vision of how we're going to do things in a way that lets us take advantage of the moment in the evolution of consciousness that we're in now. We don't have comprehensive vision, just argumentations out of an old playbook of political dialectics.
You know, there is an evolution of consciousness. Of course, there's an evolution materially and technologically.
Right.
But think about it. 100 years ago, the average person on this planet had no idea what was happening in the next village.
Absolutely.
And today, when people all over the world can become outraged at an Israeli attack on Gaza, I mean, outraged and are in the streets and acting and demonstrating, protesting and whatnot, that is a change in collective consciousness. It's possible because of communication.
Yes.
People now not only know but can care about what is happening to people on the other side of the world.
So
the concepts of injustice and the outrage at injustice can develop quickly and in ways that has revolutionary potential.
But it doesn't seem to be that it affects a no-fly zone over Gaza.
Well, it does.
It only affects a no-fly zone over those who are perceived to be enemies of the cabal that runs the world
because
and
who's
calls
in power?
themselves historically legitimate without an adequate vision to a future of liberation, which is the promise of the time. Intellectuals should be upset with the fact that we don't have such.
I'm not talking about consciousness among the rulers, because
No.
really they're about dinosaurs. I mean, truly.
That's what
in
I'm
terms
saying.
Of consciousness.
But a dinosaur in
It's
trap
dangerous.
is dangerous. That's one of the
Very
things.
dangerous.
And they've got weapon systems that can wipe us all out, and that doesn't seem to ever come up in the discussion. It's all a matter of one tax rate here, one tax rate there, and so forth. But it adds up to a qualitative paradigm shifts that we're maybe going through, like punctuated equilibrium in evolution. That's the point I'm trying to get at. And we don't seem to have any consideration of it outside of the normal politics that are put forth.
I think we do.
Okay, please do. Where are we getting the inspiration
I believe
from?
the political consciousness of the American people, not the rulers, is at a higher level today than it was at any time during my history. I was very, very active in the anti-war movement around the Vietnam period.
Witness something, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm still active today
Yes,
in building
right.
the April 9th actions.
I know what you mean. That was
but
a
I think
magic
there's
time,
a
in
difference.
fact.
I really believe that the general level of consciousness in this country is such that they no longer believe that the government works in their interest, that they believe that that the democracy that we talk about is really not as certain as they used to believe it. They don't really believe that the U.S. Policies around the world are in their interest. I believe this is true of the vast majority of people in this country.
In this country, the
In
world?
this country.
Is it dawning in the world?
Oh, more so in the world than here. You could take polls anywhere in Europe, for instance, but other places also. But even in Europe, you could take a poll and say, who is the biggest threat to humanity today? Is it Al-Qaeda? Is it the Taliban? Or is it the United States? And the United States will win hands down every time. People are starting to understand that, and they're even understanding that in this country. And I think this is a change, and I think this is
big.
Yeah, there's different levels of political consciousness. People first have to understand that their government's not working in their interest. Once they understand that, they have to understand that, well, they need to do something about it. They can't call upon the politicians. They can't call upon anybody else to do it for them. And when they start doing that, there's the basis objectively to organize people, because the government and the powers that be and the ruling class in this country have everything on their side. They have wealth, they have the military, they have the media, except for your show. They have...
and Sarah's work?
Yes. They have all this on their side. But what we have is that their interests, what their policies are against our interests. So we have the potential of organizing the vast majority of people. And if we do that by the simple fact of us refusing to cooperate, you call for a general strike, I'm for a general strike when we can do it, if we can do it. But simply by putting our hands in our pockets collectively, if we had that level of consciousness, we could stop the country and stop everything that they're doing. And so all the organizing efforts that we do, whether it's in the anti-war movement, whether it's around the budget cuts, whether it's to stop the attacks on unions, whether it's to stop the attacks on Muslims and our own civil liberties, are all pointing in that kind of direction. They're all consciousness raising, and they're all organizing tasks that lead us in that direction. And that's the direction that we have to go in if we're going to make a difference and if we're going to save humanity on this planet. And that's where my hope comes from. It comes from that we will be able to do that.
One of my heroes, if I may, one of my heroes is Buckminster Fuller, comprehensive thinker, and he used to say what it was not born with, but what we need to try and achieve is what you might loosely call in these cyber times and so forth, an operating manual for spaceship Earth. We don't have anywhere a comprehensive understanding of the context of human affairs that takes into account the capability, the trends, the understandings, and so forth, in a comprehensive way like you would if you had an operating manual, and we don't have that comprehensive vision. I ask you, if we say, okay, we're going to get rid of this war, or this, throw these bums out or something, we have to have an alternative that relates to like in a sense, an understanding of what is the possibility. We never hear the idea, you never hear it discussed in the popular press or anyway. We may actually, as a species, have transcended at the level of capability material scarcity. The world, 10,000 generations, we lived in a situation where at the level of capability, it was scarce. There was fighting. If I win, you lose. We may actually have transcended that along about the same time the weapons became species lethal. I mean, those things are never mentioned. It's all just a matter of my policy against yours, and so that's what I'm trying to get at. Where are the intellectuals that have some sort of an understanding that places our context, our political context, within the evolutionary context of universe, or within a large context, what is called
Here's
for?
the problem, and the way I would think a little bit differently than the way you are.
Well,
you use the word we, and I wouldn't use the word we in the sense that you do.
Okay.
I think they, the war makers and the rulers of this country, have one way of thinking for their own interests, and it's not in our interest. We have to develop the way. We can't just have one operating manual for spaceship Earth, because they're the ones that create the operating manual, and it's not in our interest. We have to create a different operating manual.
The intellectuals are falling down on the job. It's not the, you don't expect...
But there's different intellectuals.
No, but you don't expect the politicians, you don't expect a lion not to eat an antelope, or you don't expect a businessman. I mean, they got that way by being greedy, and they've got notions of human nature and so forth.
For 99% of human history, there was not class society. The vast majority of human history, there were no classes, and our interests were the same. It's when classes started to develop,
civilization,
and it became one person preying on others. That's the difference. And, you know, we got to get back to a period where we don't have that, where all of our interests are the same. And I think all the movements that we do, such as the anti-war movement, such as the other movements for social change, are moving us in that direction. That's the only way we're going to save the Earth.
Okay, fair enough. Go ahead, pipe in.
All right, there are changes happening in people's consciousness that have to be organized much more if the potential is to be realized. Now, I think the average person, even in the U.S. today, knows that there is more than enough for everyone.
Do you think so?
And
do you think it's voiced?
No,
it's never voiced.
It's not voiced.
That would
but
would violate economic theory.
Any poll that they do, even though the corporate media will tell you 24/7 why each war is needed, and they go out and take a poll, the majority of the population is not for the war. Even it's sort of shocking when you think how powerful the media is, and yet they do the poll, and it's up to 70%. Will say they're not for the war. Now, that doesn't mean they're in the street. It doesn't mean they're in the street. It doesn't mean they yet feel they have the power to turn that around. But it's very interesting when you consider how all-pervasive the media is. Now, what is it that the media does that stops people from acting? They also create fears. There's no justification for war. There's no support for war anymore in Iraq and Afghanistan. But by demonizing Muslims in the U.S. and saying that they're a threat right here and having a different so-called terror threat almost every week in the news, it's a way of pushing people back and keeping it confused. It's intentional confusion. When you can't change what people know in their gut, you can at least keep them enough disoriented. And it's also why it's important that movements that are addressing the war also address the conscious efforts to keep people divided right here, right now.
Divide and conquer is a way in which colonialism has worked, is it not?
Exactly, it's a way it's worked. They want to recolonize the world right now, and they're doing it by consciously creating divisions right here. Now,
around the world.
And around the world,
and
everywhere.
Among passively, I just bring it up because I don't think there's much hope in the normally perceived political process and so forth. I think the hope would have to come from the intellectuals of the world. And the intellectuals of the world have been so divided up into specializations that nobody's thinking systems of systems of systems.
Well, it might not be the intellectuals.
Where are the comprehensivists?
It might really be
that are thinking
average
about
people, because look at who was the game changer in Egypt. It was not the intellectuals.
You know,
okay, that's interesting. Yeah, and we have to anchor to history, but there has to be. Nietzsche once said that the future influences the present as much as the past. We're so tied up in reified institutions inherited out of history that we can't conceive of something new because we're reifying and anchoring to the outdated institutions
Often
that
that's
have.
true
Do
for
you understand what I'm saying?
The intellectuals,
but
it's true for, but the people who can no longer live, literally no longer survive in this system, are more capable of thinking outside the box.
You think so? Really?
Outside,
yeah. What about youth?
outside.
You think youth are more able to do that?
Look who led the struggle in Egypt.
They did, yeah. And it's a youthful generation. We had this baby boom thing that's hitting now and everything like that.
Let me make one other point.
Yeah,
on
please.
this.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that we are always told is that you don't know anything, meaning the average person, that I don't know anything. It's the experts that know everything.
Right.
And that keeps us out of thinking the process through of what would be good for ourselves and our communities.
Right.
And
you don't care what the people think.
Right.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You got the experts. Yeah.
And you know, but the people, when they come up with the ideas, seem to come up with better ideas than some of these experts.
You think
sometimes.
so, right?
Because
a group, a mass, a thing, a wisdom can come out.
A wisdom comes out
Ralph
from your
Nader
day-to-day living.
Yeah.
And I think it's a mistake sometimes to depend upon the intellectuals and the experts because it disenfranchises people.
Well,
and
experts have developed in, you know, there's millions of them crawling all over Crystal
and they have as
City,
many
and they've got
different
all
ideas
kinds of,
and policies as anybody else.
Right, and they've got all kinds of special interests that they're getting a lot of money, and it's all being.
And their policies are losing.
And the
See,
policies
people are losing confidence in them.
Well, that's another thing. I don't think the policies are losing.
Yeah.
You think they are over time? I think the concentration of wealth is greater in the United States of America now than it has ever been in any political entity in the history of the world, and it's growing.
But nevertheless,
they're getting richer.
It's a system in crisis.
It is.
I do.
It's a system in
now remember, that's dangerous.
Crisis.
That's dangerous because if you get a rat in a corner, I don't want to use the analogy loosely and everything like that. That's dangerous because they don't. And I think maybe in
terms, but they're creating the corner.
Well, no,
in other words,
yes
they've created
and no.
a system
I wonder if
so
that's the case. I
irrational.
wonder if that's the case. If it isn't something, ultimately, if we're going to make it, and that's the test. We're being tested in a way no other generation has been tested. If we're going to make it, I think there's going to have to be something that's going to be able to be not only liberating of the poor, suffering people who have been so oppressed over the long haul by the power structure du jour, whether it was feudal lords or whatever, now bankers and that sort of thing, or we're going to have to, but it's going to, and also the ecology, but we also have a tremendous capability of providing life support that is unprecedented and that is there. And it's going to have to be something that's so comprehensively appropriate, the understanding of this spaceship Earth, let's just call it that, operating manual, context, what is the reality, rather than this special, let me just finish, that is so comprehensively appropriate to the evolution of universal consciousness itself that it will be able to be understood by those responsible for the historically oriented institutions that have to be transformed fundamentally, not just on the margins. Those that are responsible for it would have to be able to understand it, go along with it in their sense of responsibility for anchoring to history. So it's not going to be overthrow. It's not going to be an overthrow. It's going to be a combination or something that can be understood probably haltingly. They would be a lagging indicator.
It may happen on a much simpler basis.
Okay,
much
maybe
simpler
so.
basis.
Okay.
Now consider 200 multi-billionaires today. 200.
Yeah, spell it out. You got it all.
Are worth more. Are worth more
yeah.
than 2 billion of the world's population.
Staggering.
And that concentration of wealth is growing and growing and growing.
Right.
Where they own just about everything.
It's all going to be owned by the Koch brothers.
At a certain point, the solution to that is so absolutely simple because the handful who own everything, that's not how it was in previous even class societies. There was a huge, there was a ruling class and people who were obligated to them. That has become smaller and smaller in a system that works less and less well, that is more and more prone to crisis and to war.
Shock.
And that will create, as it did in Egypt in 2 weeks' time, changes that made the dictatorship irrelevant. There wasn't enough police they could use on any corner. Now that can also happen on a global basis.
Okay,
and
but
we should be aware of at least the potential of that. That the solution may be simpler and may not be a solution that experts think of, but that average people, life being no longer tolerable, themselves come up with. Where they say, we don't need this dictator. We don't need this dictatorship of wealth. These pirates that take everything. So the system itself can
not
be
only that, I believe
Okay,
the system itself has caused the crisis. The system itself is in crisis, and that's why they're in a corner.
Do you think so?
Yeah, let me give you say a couple of things.
It's systemic.
It is systemic.
I don't think it's any one group.
I'm not talking about a group. I'm talking about the system.
Or a class.
Well,
it's the system writ large.
Here's what I think.
Because 100 trillion cells in a human organism, they all matter, and they all communicate as a system. We're a system. And what we have to think is large. We're coming to a point where we're coming
large
to something
and
like,
simple,
okay, maybe, but you could take analogies from Stephen Jay Gould or that. We're coming to a point of punctuated equilibrium. We're coming to the end of the human experience in universe. We're either going to be stillborn, we're going to blow it up. And there are odds makers who would say that's likely the case, that we're going to get them so in the corner that they're going to not do it. They're going to blow it. They're going to pull the plug. They're going to let it loose. And if they do, it's existentially new. So that will end the evolution of consciousness. Or we're going to come to a transcendent stage, a stage of relating to the universe by fulfilling our purpose in evolutionary terms, to where, like punctuated equilibrium, we're in the womb. We're coming into a new condition. You can't know that condition from inside the womb, but we're coming to a liberated humanity within an ecological context. You could stretch out a couple hundred years or something, that has to be what happened. Then there will be a resonancy that will interaccommodate us to universe at a level transcendent that we've been in since 200,000 years we've been on this planet in evolutionary terms. We're at a time of qualitative transformation, and it never comes up and out of intellectual circles.
I think it's not the intellectual circles. Let me
I mean intellectual, not in the sense of the specialists and so forth that operate in the Pentagon.
I think the system that we have in this country is in crisis, and
yes, in the planet.
In the planet, I think that it created its own crisis. I think that we have a system, the capitalist system in this country, that has to continue to expand, and it's having difficulty doing that.
Right.
We're in a finite world, and it has difficulty expanding. If you look at, it used to be that only about 7% of the gross national product had to do with financial transactions and making money that way. Now it's up to about 45.
Absolutely
These are
right.
artificial.
Fed funds,
These are artificial things. This is also the reason why they have to make more money by pushing down on working people. That's what's going on in Wisconsin and all the other states is about, to try to destroy the unions, to continue at an accelerated rate to transfer wealth from working people and the poor to the extremely rich. That's also why we're going to continue to have war. That's why we have this globalization idea, where if they go overseas with investments and with corporations, they can make more money off of the backs of unorganized, poorly paid workers, and so forth. But it also means that it makes the whole system more vulnerable when they go overseas like that. And it's why we have such a strong military in 130 countries around the world, and why war today is endemic to the system that we have.
Yeah,
and why an anti-war movement is so important to the system that we have.
March 9th.
I'm trying to bring you back
April
to it
9th.
Because we need to talk about April 9th.
Absolutely, that's mentioned because it's
and this is why also that all these struggles that are happening right now, how they're trying to divide us, how they're with the fear and going against the Muslims, how they're trying to attack the unions, and how the Arab Spring that we're seeing with these revolutions going on against U.S.-sponsored dictators is such a threat to them.
Yeah.
And it's very, very important at this point, therefore, that we have an anti-war movement to help stay their hand.
Yes.
Because they would like to put these things back, and they're trying, believe me.
Yeah.
No matter what they're saying in Washington about how they support democracy in Egypt, they haven't supported democracy in Egypt for 30
I suppose that plea
years.
to have them included is out there really on the far extremes of what we're going to need
there
at
is
some
a they
point.
and
It's
there
a
is an
keystone
us,
thing.
and they
But
and
right
us
now,
have a different agenda.
Right now, we got to make sure they don't run roughshod over things and get in a runaway kind of condition.
Anyway,
like
it's
that.
their inability of their system to continue to expand and produce in the way that they feel necessary that is putting them in this kind of crisis. And it's a crisis that can destroy the world. It can destroy the world with nuclear weapons, or it can destroy the world with nuclear power, like we're seeing in Japan. They are deregulating everything. They are not, you know, so we have spills in the Gulf Coast. We have deregulation everywhere that is a threat to humanity. And so either we stop them or humanity dies. I am confident we're going to stop them. And when you just look at what's happened in the past 6 months around the world, and even in this country, you see a level of struggle and a level of fight back there, pushing us to the wall, pushing us to the wall. You see a level of fight back that you haven't seen in my lifetime. And that's where the hope is. And that's what we have to organize.
Do you think we're getting back to where the level of pushback we had along about 1970 or so at Kent State and so forth was here, where it made it impossible? More than them?
It's quite a ways from that now, but the potential, because take in the 1960s and 70s, the great majority of the population did still believe in the government and believe in the political leadership, believed in the system. And there was certainly a radical and a revolutionary current that was
very
for complete change
and
anti-war and for civil rights against racism.
Absolutely.
But now you have the vast majority who are, as I said before, against every war and also feel that their government does not represent their interests. So the potential for change can come very, very quickly. And part of it is organizing it, bringing those issues of war and racism, of refusing to be part of the demonization of Muslims, bringing those issues together consciously. When we're able to do that, whether it's one demonstration, April 9, or seeing it as a continuing into the future. There is a strategy behind this. There really is a strategy behind it of pulling people in to act in their own interests and connecting war and the cutbacks here, the racist climate. That's how to challenge the system.
Okay,
say it doesn't work for you.
Yeah, and it should dawn. People have put up with it for so long. They're used to putting up for it, and there's a lot of propaganda that wants to put them in that direction. And remember, when you say our system, that's the system that has been assumed to be legitimate on the international level. It's what happened. It's what happened and has been evolved since 1776 when we took a stance against feudalism. And we took a system, and that system has been imposed or counts itself and allows itself to be able to be seen by the media as legitimate, historically legitimate. So that means in Egypt, you've got a lot of people, 40% are poverty struck. They're going to be poverty struck next week. And there's going to be answers about how are they going to get bread? How are they going to get things done? And the only thing when they say democracy, they say, what model are they talking about? They're talking about the model of the United States of America for the world. We used to have the Soviet Union. It imploded. Does that mean that the ideas of Marx are of no relevance? I think there's still some elements of that that could be understood in a dialectic understanding of things even in this context. Or where are the examples? Lord Keynes, who did all of the stuff in the John Maynard Keynes in the Depression and Second World War, set up the pattern that we have called, and we call it legitimate. And he warned in a letter to his grandchildren, I hate to be devil's advocate here, but he warned in the letter to his grandchildren that in their maturity, humanity is going to be, that would be about now, it would be confronted with something that's very hard to understand out of the context they were talking about, massive, technologically induced unemployment. We distribute buying power or demand to the people, and it seems to be assumed by everybody in the world it's perfectly all right for a few people to own all the assets, all the capital assets, all the structure, the buildings, everything like it's okay. They can own it all, and we will be serfs on their estate, picking up whatever they deem it is all right for us to pick up in order to get a wage. That we are laborers. We will fall right in line with whatever they dictate. It's okay for them to own it all. There's never, on the progressive side, the idea that technology is becoming increasingly responsible for production, the ownership and the means of forming capital and technological capability to affect the environment, rather than it being concentrated in so few hands by not paying attention to it, you have to democratize the means by which the ownership of the capital, let's say even in the private sector,
Harold,
is distributed to the masses so that there's a way for them to be able to clear the market. If they can't clear the market.
Change breaks through.
Do you understand?
I understand, but change
and we don't
breaks
have it.
through.
All they're going to do is create jobs, or try to.
When things seem at the most irrational.
They don't want to create jobs right now.
It's not they don't want to. It's structural. If you've got a combine and it can turn out 50,000 barrels of
you're right, but
grain and nobody drives it, it's hard to
way.
Use the labor theory of value to say we're going to distribute to the people by labor.
This way. If a computer can produce a certain amount of goods, that computer still needs to be programmed, that computer still needs to be operated. It, in some sense, gives more power to the worker, because that one worker now, by his taking away his labor, has stopped a much greater amount of production than he would have before. So technology is not necessary. It's a bigger tool. But let me tell you, Keynesian economics is no longer looked at anymore. That's what neoliberalism is about. That has thrown Keynesian economics
what do we got?
off of,
what do we got? Schumpeter with his entrepreneurialism? Have we got Friedman? What have we got?
We got a situation where under Keynesian economics they said, well, we need to have unemployment insurance. We need to have welfare. We need to have some kind of safety net so that if people are unemployed, they still have purchasing power, and that purchasing power can make sure that we don't go through these high ups and downs that capitalism used to do.
Yeah.
And that would keep us at a level pace.
Right.
Now they've overthrown Keynesian economics, and now they've put this neoliberalism policy in where they're getting rid of every aspect of that safety net.
If it's not Keynes, who is it? Is it Schumpeter with creative entrepreneurialism? Is it Friedman? Is it the fundamental market fundamentalism?
It's very much like Friedman and market fundamentalism.
Well, okay.
It's going back to the early days of the Industrial Revolution.
And that's not adequate. That's not adequate to what we need.
And we've already seen the huge shifts up and down.
But
it's not adequate also in an economy that produces such an enormous surplus that every time there's an economic crash and the economy starts up again, the surplus is so great that the crash comes again. In other words, they can no longer organize their own system because technology has made it so fabulously productive. Now that is a real problem. It's a problem for them, and it also is a reason that in the eyes, increasingly, of people globally, they say this system has no solutions for us.
Well, that's what I'm sort of, in a sense, trying to say. That's what I'm trying to say. Because I think it's true, whether we want to think so or not. And, of course, people had to make the computers. And the whole story of technology is you had to build things. You took advantage of that in a labor theory of value. You did that. But now it's getting to the point where the reality of input to production is going maybe 10% with something other than labor to where it's going to where capital instruments and are responsible for production. And it's all owned by a tiny plutocratic class.
But nevertheless,
why?
Today,
and why
the average worker, workers on one side of the world or the other, workers in India, workers in the Philippines, or here, have the capacity also to shut it down. That wasn't true for peasants in an earlier time who could. If they withheld their labor, they themselves wouldn't eat.
No, but the point is, it's not at the level of politics, really. It's not at the level of politics. It's at the level of a sort of, meta reality of understanding things other than what's coming out of history. And that is true that the productive process is becoming increasingly technological. I mean, it's becoming capital instrument. And the input, if you've got an algorithm that can do what 500,000 workers can do without them pulling they're training people to be clerks in a corporate thing where they sit and click boxes. I mean, they're training people to be subservient to corporate America where they become clerks checking boxes within a system that is, it could be done rapidly and very productively, providing product, let's say, or providing production, but the people are not going to have, but they don't need the people to produce. They can produce without the people.
They still need the people to produce. One of the things that automation has done,
okay,
one of the things that automation has done.
Obviously they will, but the trend is in that direction. They obviously will need people. There will have to be labor, but to depend on it as a way of distributing income or accepting it by the people, that it's okay, they should have an ownership, you could have. This would be a thing that might appeal to the crazies that you want to appeal to in the end, that keystone need that we're going to have, that you distribute ownership of the means of production to the people as a means of distributing income instead of only labor. They would be on the side. And the only country in the world that did that in a systematic way was Libya. And we're just bombing the bejesus out of that because they could have become a threat to the model that's called legitimate historically and is not. It's reified, outdated institutions. He would distribute, when you form capital, they democratize capital ownership. You couldn't hire anybody. You start a business, you couldn't hire them. They had to be the owners of the capital instrument. If we had the owners of the capital instruments, including all of the means of production, rather than letting it all concentrate in a few hands, but we're all tied up with the idea of how wonderful it is for people to go and get a job on the estate where the template's all set by the masters who own all the capital assets.
I think that technology has made working people more productive. In the last several decades, the productive capacity of the American worker has grown tremendously, but they've gotten none of the benefits of that increased production. The actual wages of working people in this country have stayed the same or gone slightly down, where the owners, if you look at CEOs of corporations, they used to be 40 times on an average what the average worker was.
Hundreds.
Now they're about 400 times.
Yeah, I know.
So all that wealth went to their hands.
That's because they own the capital assets that are creating the wealth.
But it creates a much bigger
they're being ripped off. They're being ripped off. Because if they really, they're not getting, the owners of the capital assets do not get the full return of what is being produced by the capital assets because of taxes and things.
But they don't pay taxes. Take GE,
well,
one of the largest corporations.
Yeah, they didn't pay any taxes
one of the largest corporations that there is, and one of the biggest military corporations.
Yeah, right.
And one of the biggest owners of the media. Yeah. And they pay no taxes whatsoever.
Yeah.
Now, that combination.
Well, over the longer haul.
Of an owner of media and that combination also of those who create the very death machines, and at the same time give back nothing.
Well,
give back nothing.
Yeah, but
see, it really is an explosive mix.
Well, yes.
And it means that they will become, in a genuine sense, less relevant for this because they can't solve. They can own it, but they can't solve the problems of humanity.
No, but they own
and
the
that means they're past their
They own the means
ruling
of
classes
production.
are pulled apart when they can no
of
longer solve society's problems.
Well, I'm suggesting, right, that productivity is almost always related to labor. We have a tremendous basis of adherence to the labor theory of value. Marx and so forth, surplus labor theory. It's all created by labor, and it's surplus, it's congealed labor, and so we'll make a revolution in 1848, and we have commitment to that kind of thing. And that gives, because you're dealing with how people get a sense of identity. I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm a this, they get to big questions and everything. But it's possible that they are able to just say, oh, yeah, really important, and pull the wool over our eyes, and we accept that Keynes may or may not be wrong, massive technologically induced unemployment. You do not have to have people to produce. And it's no good to allow just the few to own that which is producing increasing percentages of the world production.
But profit comes from labor.
Labor,
and
well,
this is a real crisis
well,
also
this is,
for the system.
Well, okay, that's a keystone thing at the end. That's hard to understand because the other thing falls into the normal political thing, and we have to anchor it to history. We want to anchor it to history that includes Woodstock and anti-Vietnam and stop the war machine and all these kind of things, but it's within a larger context, it seems to me, that it's taking place. You got to have, I think what you have to do is you have to create some way of forming capital in a way where it's democratically distributed as a way of distributing buying power. They're going to have to be able to have buying power to clear the market.
Otherwise, they're all over the place. Ideas need focus. They need programs. They need demands.
Demand. They're going to need demand to buy what can be produced. And if people have no job, and if they have no income, they can't buy.
Right.
So the
and
people have to have income. You have to have a way of getting income to the people the way things are being produced. And when the progressive community gets a hold of that, they'll have a system for hoisting the system on its own petard. They don't have that now. We don't have a way of hoisting the system on its own petard. And that's what we need in order to find real vision of what the future requires, in my humble opinion. One country that was trying to do that was Libya. I don't know if they're going to have a chance.
Well, what's being destroyed?
Do you want to talk about?
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm sorry, I get up here. Let's see, Josh, if you can come in on this. This is something that is of the moment and something that has to be addressed absolutely, because to have it all done in a way. This is the April 9, right?
That's
here
right.
in New York City. And it's the
next Saturday.
Or it'll
be this Saturday when this airs.
It'll be this Saturday when this airs. That's right. This is going to air on the 5th, right? And this will air on Friday. And it's noon at Union Square here in New York City. And the list of organizations that are for this is virtually everybody over here. It seems to me that all the peace organizations have collectively signed on to this.
More than the peace organizations. And I think it's related to what we were talking about, because there are over 500 organizations. One of the big features of this rally is the buy-in from the Muslim community, which has itself been pushed to the wall and is starting to fight back, and is starting to see that they have allies within the anti-war movement. This morning, Sarah and I were both at a press conference organized by the Muslim community for April 9th.
Okay.
And so one of the key features of this rally is not just that we're opposed to the wars. We are extremely opposed to the wars and calling for bring the troops home and no more invasions and no more attacks on other countries, including Libya, but that we also are opposed to the Islamophobia that is in our society as a way to create the kind of fear to justify the wars for people. And we are also understand that, that while trillions are being spent while trillions are being spent on war, that we have not enough money for our states or for the needs of people. So we're calling for that money to be used instead for people's needs and not for war. So it's related to all the topics that we were talking about, and that's the difference with the anti-war movement today, that the dots are connected much clearer than they were in the past. And it's starting to bring together in ways a movement that really can make the kind of change that we've been talking about for the rest of this
Wonderful.
program.
It used to be the commies. Remember COINTELPRO and all of that? They would attack the commies. Now it's the Muslims, right, that they're attacking. And it's very dangerous.
Efforts to create
the whole thing.
Fear.
We got to get a better anchoring to history than the one that they try to push over.
Absolutely.
On us.
Well, this linking that the money is there. The money's there for jobs programs. The money's there for education. It's all going to war. So making that very conscious link. And also having an organized force that is saying no to the racism and the anti-Muslim and the anti-immigrant attacks. See, unity has to be consciously built every step of the way and linked to the immediate problems that people have. Because if it's not, then it's an abstraction. So it is an effort to really